Ethan never thought his life would lead him inside the royal palace. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders, not to walk through golden halls and stand guard beside a princess. But fate had brought him here. The king wanted the best men to protect his daughter Claire, and Ethan's name was called. He did not feel special. He only felt the weight of duty. He was not like the other guards who showed off their strength or tried to impress the nobles. Ethan was quiet, simple, and kept his eyes on his task. He came from a small village far from the capital, where people worked hard and spoke little. He had learned to fight because the world was dangerous, not because he wanted glory. When he stood in the grand palace, he felt small, like he did not belong. Princess Claire noticed him the first day. She had seen many guards before, all wearing the same armor and carrying the same weapons. But Ethan did not look at her the way others did. Some stared with pride, some with fear, some with hidden desire for power. Ethan looked at her as if she was simply a person he had to protect. His eyes did not rise or fall. They were calm, steady, and honest. In her world, people were always trying to gain something from her. They spoke sweet words, bowed deeply, and smiled when they wanted favors. Claire had learned to see through those masks, but Ethan wore no mask. He said little, only answered when spoken to, and never tried to please her. It made her curious. When he walked beside her, she sometimes turned her head to study him. Steps were even and strong, not rushed. When nobles mocked him for his plain armor, he did not react. When servants dropped trays and others laughed, he helped them quietly without a word. Claire saw all of this from her seat, though she did not show it. Secretly, she began to watch him. Ethan noticed the eyes of the princess sometimes on him, but he thought nothing of it. To him, she was his duty. He had sworn to keep her safe, even at the cost of his life. He remembered his mother's words before he left his village. A man's worth is not in gold or land, but in the promises he keeps. So Ethan held to that. Every day he stood tall and silent, while the palace around him played games of power. One evening, during a gathering in the Great Hall, Claire's brother teased Ethan. He asked why a man with no noble blood should guard a princess. The crowd laughed. Ethan did not answer, kept his eyes forward and his stance firm. Claire, sitting on her throne, saw the calm on his face. He was not shaken by insult, and that struck her more than any clever reply could have. Later, as Claire walked through the gardens, Ethan followed a few steps behind. She slowed her pace and asked him simple questions. Where did he come from? What did he believe in? What did he want for his future? Ethan answered with plain words. He spoke of his village, his parents, and how he had no dream of power. He only wished to serve with honor and protect those who could not protect themselves. Claire listened, and for the first time in many months, she felt her heart soften. She did not tell anyone of her growing interest. It was a secret she kept close. But each day she found herself thinking of Ethan, of his strong silence, and the way he treated people as equals. Ouch. She had met many men who called themselves brave, yet when tested, they cared only for their own name. Ethan did not speak of bravery, but he lived it in small actions. As the days passed, Claire's curiosity grew into something deeper. She began to wonder what it would be like if he were not just her guard, but something more. But she kept those thoughts hidden, even from herself, because she knew the rules of her world. A princess was meant to marry a noble, not a humble soldier. Still, when she looked at Ethan, she saw a truth she could not ignore. And so their story began with a princess who secretly examined her humble guard. And a guard who thought only of duty, not knowing he had already captured her heart. Princess Claire could not stop herself from watching Ethan. Day after day, he stood near her, silent and steady, like a wall no storm could move. His face showed little, yet his actions spoke louder than the words of 100 nobles. She began to notice things others ignored. When the servants hurried through the halls, most guards looked down on them. Ethan never did. Once a young boy dropped a tray of food and stood frozen with fear, waiting for harsh words. The nobles laughed, but Ethan bent down and helped pick up the pieces. He did not scold or mock. He only gave the boy a calm nod, as if to say mistakes meant nothing. Claire saw this from her seat and felt something stir in her chest. Another day, she tested him with a question. As they walked through the gardens, she asked, "Do you enjoy guarding me, or is it only a burden?" Most men would answer with flattery, telling her she was a blessing to guard, or praising her beauty. Ethan looked ahead and spoke plain. "It is my duty. I was chosen to protect you, so I will." His voice was steady, without pride or weakness. Claire's lips curved in a small smile, though she quickly hid it. His honesty was like clear water in a palace filled with shadows. As the weeks passed, she grew more bold. Sometimes she asked him about his past. He told her of his village, where people worked with their hands and shared their harvest. He told her of his father who taught him to fight, and his mother who taught him to keep his word. There was no shine of wealth in his story, but there was strength. Claire felt as if she could see his world through his eyes, a world far more real than the golden halls around her. Still, she kept her curiosity hidden. To the court, she remained the calm princess, graceful and untouchable. Only in secret did her eyes follow Ethan when he did not see. She began to measure other men by his example, and each one failed. They boasted, they lied, they tried to gain favor, but none stood as steady as her guard. One afternoon in the training yard, Claire came to watch the soldiers practice. They clashed with steel, shouting with each strike. Ethan fought with simple movements, no wasted motion, no show for the crowd. When another guard mocked his plain style, Ethan only nodded and returned to his stance. He did not seek applause, and Claire admired him all the more. It was then she thought, perhaps true strength needed no witness. At a banquet that night, a noble spoke cruelly to a servant girl, calling her worthless. Claire waited to see what Ethan would do. Though he stood silent, his eyes turned sharp, and he moved to place himself between the girl and the noble. The noble sneered but stepped back when he saw Ethan's steady gaze. Claire's heart beat faster. It was not just duty that guided him, but something deeper, a respect for all lives. That night, Claire sat by her window long after the palace slept. She thought of the guard, who asked for nothing, who spoke only truth, who carried himself with quiet honor. She had known men who claimed they would die for her, yet their words rang hollow. Ethan said little, yet she believed he would stand between her and any blade without question. She wondered if he even knew how rare he was. In the days that followed, Claire began to test herself as much as she tested him. She tried to speak less with others who filled her ears with false praise, and instead listened when Ethan gave short answers. She tried to see the world as he did, without the glitter of crowns and jewels, and more with the weight of simple duty. She found peace in it, though she did not say why. Ethan, for his part, noticed little of her hidden thoughts. He walked his post, watched for danger, and answered when spoken to. To him, the princess was a life he must guard, not a woman he could dream about. Yet he felt something new when she asked him questions. He did not say it aloud, but he found her voice stayed with him even after she was gone. And so, the bond between them grew, though neither spoke of it. She examined him in secret, learning his heart, while he carried on with quiet strength. Neither of them knew that these small moments were shaping a path that would change both their lives forever. The palace was filled with whispers. Servants carried messages with worried faces, and nobles spoke behind closed doors. Rumors spread that danger was near. Some said enemies had entered the city, others claimed traitors walked inside the very palace. Claire heard these words but never showed fear. She had been raised to appear strong before others, yet in her heart she felt the weight of the threat. Ethan noticed it too. He had lived long enough to know when silence meant danger. The halls seemed darker, the voices sharper, and every shadow felt heavy. He tightened his guard around Claire, watching closely, his hand never far from his sword. Unlike the other guards, who sometimes laughed and lost focus, Ethan stayed alert from morning until night. One evening, during a gathering in the throne room, Claire saw how the nobles moved like players in a game. Some looked at her with false smiles, others with hidden hunger for power. She wondered which of them might turn against her family if the chance came. When her eyes drifted to Ethan, she felt calm. He stood firm, not touched by greed or fear, only ready to protect. That night, as Claire walked back to her chambers, Ethan followed close.
Ash.
She slowed her steps and asked him, "Do you believe the danger is real?" Ethan's voice was low. "Yes." Danger often shows itself in whispers before it strikes in steel. Claire felt a chill, but his calm tone steadied her. She knew he was not a man to speak without reason. Soon after the first attempt came, Blair was walking through the garden with her ladies, when arrows flew from the trees. Screams filled the air. The other guards rushed in confusion, but Ethan moved with sharp purpose. He covered Claire with his shield and shouted for her to stay low. He guided her behind the stone wall, blocking the arrows with his own body. 2 arrows struck his armor, but he stood firm. When soldiers chased down the attackers, Ethan did not move from her side. Claire's hands trembled as she looked at him. "You could have been killed," she said in a hushed voice. Ethan shook his head. "Your life is worth more than mine. I swore to protect you." She wanted to argue, to tell him his life mattered too, but no words came. She only stared at him, her heart pounding with fear and something she could not name. After the attack, the palace tightened its watch. More guards were posted, more doors locked. But Claire trusted only Ethan. She began to ask for him by name when she left her chambers. The other guards noticed and whispered among themselves, but Claire did not care. She felt safe only when he was near. Another night, as the moonlight filled the hall, Claire found herself speaking to Ethan again. "Why do you risk yourself so easily?" she asked. He stood silent for a moment, then said, "Because that is what I was chosen for. A man's word is all he has. If I break it, I am nothing." She watched him, wondering how a man so humble could carry such unshakable strength. In the days that followed, Claire began to rely on him more. When she walked through the halls, she looked for his shadow behind her. When nobles spoke with sharp tongues, she glanced at his steady stance and found courage. She never told him how much his presence meant to her, but she carried it in her heart. Yet the threats did not end. More signs of betrayal grew in the court. Poisoned wine was found in the kitchens. Strange men were seen near the palace walls. Claire knew the storm was coming, and when it broke, it would strike hard. But when she looked at Ethan, she believed she could face it. He was only one man, but to her, he was stronger than an army. In silence, their bond grew tighter. He thought only of duty. She thought only of him. Neither spoke the truth aloud, but both knew their fates were slowly becoming bound together. Not by command or crown, but by something far deeper. The day of the festival came, and the palace filled with color and music. Banners waved from the walls, and people from far towns crowded into the great square. Claire was expected to appear before them, smiling as if no threat hung over her. She dressed in bright silk, placed the crown on her head, and walked out with her guards at her side. Ethan walked close, his eyes scanning the crowd for danger. At first, all seemed peaceful. Children threw flowers, and the sound of drums filled the air. But Claire noticed Ethan's hand rest on his sword. His gaze never stayed still. He saw what others missed. Then, without warning, chaos broke. Men pushed through the crowd, blades flashing. They rushed toward Claire, shouting. Guards moved, but many were caught off guard. Ethan reacted first, pushed Claire back, raising his shield as steel clashed against it. The sound of blades striking rang loud. Claire's heart raced as she saw him stand against the attackers, his body between her and death. Others joined the fight, but Ethan's presence never left her side. An enemy struck with a heavy blow, knocking Ethan to his knees. Claire gasped, reaching out, but he forced himself up again, blood running from his arm. He did not retreat. Instead, he drove forward, cutting down the man who had struck him. Claire felt fear tighten in her chest, but also awe. He fought not for glory, but to keep her safe. In the chaos, Claire's carriage driver tried to pull her away, but she refused. She would not leave while Ethan stood alone. She stayed behind the shield he carried, moving as he guided her through the storm. Finally, the soldiers of the palace broke the attackers and dragged them away. The square was left with blood and silence where music had been. When the danger passed, Ethan staggered. His armor was cut, his hands shook, and he bled from more than one wound. Still, he stayed upright until Claire touched his arm. "Enough," she whispered, her voice firm. "You have done more than enough." Only then did he allow himself to sink to the ground. Against all custom, Claire knelt beside him. Others rushed to stop her, but she raised her hand, and they stepped back. She tore a part of her silk robe to press against his wound. Ethan tried to protest, saying, "Princess, this is not right." But Claire shook her head. "I decide what is right," she said. Her hands trembled as she bound his arm, but her eyes never left his face. As she worked, he looked at her with surprise. No one of her station had ever touched him with such care. For a moment, the sounds of the crowd faded, and there was only the two of them. Claire felt her heart beating hard, not from fear now, but from something deeper. She wanted him to live, not as a guard, but as a man she had come to care for. When the healers arrived, Claire refused to step aside until they promised to treat him well. Ethan, weak from blood loss, finally allowed himself to be carried away, but his eyes stayed on hers until the doors closed between them. That night, Claire could not sleep. She sat by her window, the memory of his shield before her, the sight of his blood on her hands. She thought of the words he had said before, about his duty and his promise. He believed his life was worth less than hers, but she could not accept that. Not anymore. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if her heart belonged not to a prince or a noble, but to the humble guard who had stood against death for her. She whispered his name to the night, a secret she would tell no one, not yet. But deep within, she knew the truth. Her heart had already chosen. While the palace slept, Claire's feelings grew stronger, no longer just curiosity or admiration. What she felt now was something far more dangerous, for it was love. And love between a princess and her guard could change everything. The palace grew quiet after the attack, but Claire's thoughts never rested. She visited the healers often, asking about Ethan's wounds. They told her he would live, though he needed time to recover. Still, she could not forget the sight of him bleeding for her, nor the way his eyes had stayed on hers until the doors closed. She found herself thinking of him in every moment of silence. Claire began to ask questions about him, questions she never asked before. She called for old records, speaking to captains who had known him. What she learned surprised her. Ethan had no noble name, no land, no wealth. He came from a small farming village where he had worked the fields before joining the army. He had earned his place through skill and courage, never through family ties. Every step he took had been his own. She read stories of how he had defended villages from raiders, of how he had chosen to stand his ground when others fled. Never once had he asked for reward. Instead, he returned to his post, silent as always. Claire's respect for him deepened. She began to see the lines of his life more clearly, a life built on honor and quiet strength. At night, when the palace was still, Claire thought of what it meant. She compared Ethan to the nobles who surrounded her, men with fine clothes and polished words. They wanted her hand not for who she was, but for the power it gave them. Ethan wanted nothing from her, yet he had given everything, even his blood. Her heart whispered a truth she dared not speak. She had fallen in love with him. Ethan, still recovering, did not know of her thoughts. He lay in a small chamber, refusing special treatment, speaking little as healers tended his wounds. He did not think himself worthy of a princess's care. When Claire entered one evening, he tried to rise, but she placed her hand on his shoulder and told him to rest. For the first time, he looked at her not only as his duty, but as a woman standing before him. "You should not be here, Ethan," said softly. "This is not fitting for you." Claire shook her head. "It is fitting if I choose it. I wanted to see you with my own eyes." Silence hung between them. Ethan lowered his gaze, unsure how to answer. Claire felt her heart race, but she spoke no more. She only sat beside him until the candles burned low. In the days that followed, Claire carried her secret love in silence. She continued her duties as princess, meeting with her father and speaking with nobles, but her mind often drifted to Ethan. She remembered his calm voice, his steady hands, his shield raised in front of her. She thought of the simple way he spoke of his village, and she wished she could walk in that quiet world with him. She told no one of her feelings, for she knew what others would say. A princess could not love a guard. A marriage had to bind kingdoms and secure alliances. Her heart's choice would never be accepted. But Claire could not stop what had already taken root inside her. Ethan, too, began to notice her kindness toward him. She visited him more than duty required. She listened to his words with patience, and she looked at him not as a soldier, but as a man. He did not speak his feelings aloud, for he was a humble guard who believed such thoughts dangerous. Yet inside, he felt something he had never felt before. When he thought of her smile, his pain seemed lighter. Claire, sitting in her chamber late at night, faced the truth alone. She had watched him in secret, studied his life, and tested his heart. Now she knew what she had not wished to admit. She loved Ethan, the humble guard, more than any noble prince who might ask for her hand. And though the world might stand against it, her heart would not let her turn away. Thus the secret grew stronger within her, unspoken yet undeniable. The princess and the guard walked their paths side by side, unaware that the trials to come would force their hidden feelings into the open, where no secret could hide again. The palace stood heavy with silence. Though the festival attack had been stopped, whispers of betrayal still filled the halls. Claire felt the danger closer with each passing day. She could not trust the nobles, for their eyes sought power. She could not even trust some of her father's men, for greed and fear pulled them away from loyalty. But she trusted Ethan. Always she trusted him. Ethan had returned to his post, though his wounds were not fully healed. He refused to rest while threats circled the royal family, carried his shield as if it were a part of him, never leaving Claire's side. His eyes stayed sharp, watching every shadow, every corner of the great halls. He felt something was coming, something greater than the attack at the festival. His feeling proved true. One night, as the court gathered for a feast, the traitors made their move. Men inside the palace turned their blades against their own. Guards loyal to gold rather than honor struck without warning. Screams filled the grand hall, and the music ended in chaos. Claire froze as she saw nobles fall, the air heavy with betrayal. Ethan reacted at once. He pulled Claire back from the table, his shield rising as arrows flew from above. His voice was steady, giving orders to the few loyal guards. "Form around the princess," he called, though he stayed at the front, facing the traitors himself. Blades clashed, and the feast turned into a battlefield. Claire watched in fear, but also in awe. Ethan fought like a man with nothing to lose. Even when 3 men struck at once, he held his ground. He was cut across the side, yet he did not fall. He forced the attackers back, keeping Claire safe behind him. Her heart pounded as she saw his blood stain the floor, yet his stance never wavered. At one point, a traitor slipped past the line, rushing straight toward Claire. Her breath caught as she saw the blade raise high. But before it fell, Ethan hurled himself between them, his shield taking the strike. The blow forced him to his knees, yet he rose again, driving the attacker back. Claire could not speak, her throat tight with fear. But inside, she knew the truth. This man was ready to die for her, not for crown or gold, but for his promise. The fight raged until loyal soldiers finally broke through the traitors. The hall was left in ruin, with bodies on the floor and the smell of steel in the air. Ethan stood covered in blood, both his own and his enemies'. He swayed but did not fall, his eyes still searching for danger until he was sure Claire was safe. When the hall grew quiet, Claire stepped forward, ignoring the stares of the court. She touched Ethan's arm gently. "You should rest," she whispered. But Ethan only shook his head. "As long as you stand, I will stand." His words were simple, yet they struck her heart more deeply than any vow of marriage she had ever heard. Later that night, when the traitors had been dealt with and the palace locked down, Claire sat alone in her chamber. She thought of what had happened, of the man who had bled and fought without hesitation. She thought of the rules that said she must marry a noble for the sake of the kingdom. But her heart had already made its choice. No prince or noble could ever match Ethan's loyalty, his courage, his truth. She walked to the window, looking out at the silent city. She knew what she must face. If she followed tradition, she would lose him forever. But if she followed her heart, she would risk everything, even the anger of her family and the scorn of the court. She whispered his name, her voice soft in the dark. She promised herself she would not let him go. In another chamber, Ethan cleaned his blade in silence. His body ached, his wounds burned, but his mind stayed clear. He thought only of the promise he had kept, the duty he would not abandon. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face. He did not understand the warmth that spread through his chest, but he knew it was dangerous. Still, he could not push it away. And so, the night ended with 2 hearts bound by silence, both knowing their lives had changed. The bond between the princess and her humble guard had grown too strong to be denied, and soon the world would force them to face what they felt with no place left to hide. The days after the betrayal were heavy with silence. The palace was scarred, the trust between nobles shattered, and the people looked to the royal family for strength. Claire stood tall before them, her crown shining, her voice steady. Yet inside her heart carried a secret stronger than duty. She could no longer deny what she felt for Ethan. Ethan returned to his post, though his body still carried wounds. He walked as if nothing had changed, guarding Claire with the same calm strength. But something had changed. Each time their eyes met, there was a weight in the air, unspoken yet powerful. Ethan tried to bury his feelings, for he believed a guard should never dream of a princess. Still, the truth lived in his heart. One evening, after a council meeting filled with bitter arguments, Claire asked Ethan to walk with her in the garden. The air was cool, and the moon cast silver light on the paths. They walked in silence for a time, until Claire stopped and turned to him. Her eyes held a firmness he had never seen before. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "I have something to tell you. For many days I have watched you. I saw your honesty when others lied. I saw your courage when others hid. I saw your heart when others showed only pride. You stood for me when all the world turned against me. And because of that, I can no longer keep silent." Ethan looked at her, his chest tight. "Princess," he began, "please do not speak what cannot be. My place is to guard you, not to stand beside you as anything more." Claire stepped closer, her voice firm. "You are wrong. My heart is my own, and it belongs to you. I do not care for their rules, their crowns, their chains of tradition. I care for the man who bled for me, the man who never sought reward, the man who showed me truth when all else was false." Ethan's breath caught. He wanted to speak, to deny, to protect her from the danger of such words, but the look in her eyes broke down every wall inside him. He could no longer pretend. "I have tried to bury these feelings," he confessed, his voice rough, "but every time I see you, they rise again. I would give my life for you, not because of duty, but because of love." For a moment, the world was silent around them. Claire reached out, taking his hand. It was the first time a princess had ever touched a guard in such a way, and it was the first time Ethan allowed himself to feel the truth fully. In that quiet garden, under the moonlight, they stood not as princess and guard, but as a woman and a man who had found each other. In the days that followed, word of their closeness began to spread. The court whispered, nobles disapproved, and even her family questioned her choice. But Claire did not bend. When pressed to explain, she spoke with a voice strong as steel. "I will not marry for politics. I will not bind myself to liars or cowards. I will give my hand to the man who proved his worth with his life, not with his name." Ethan is that man. Shock filled the hall, yet no one dared speak against her too strongly. They had all seen Ethan's courage, how he stood when others fell. The people outside the palace, hearing the story, began to cheer for him. They loved the idea of a princess choosing a humble guard over selfish nobles. Slowly, resistance began to fade. Ethan, though uneasy, stood beside Claire when she declared her choice. He did not seek power nor glory, but he could not turn away from her love. He promised her once again, not as her guard, but as her equal, that he would protect her with every breath. And so their story reached its beginning, not its end. A princess who once watched her guard in secret now stood openly by his side. A humble soldier who thought himself unworthy found that he had been worthy all along. Together they faced the uncertain future, bound not by crown or command, but by love that no danger, no court, and no tradition could break.